In the previous lesson, we learned about the if-else statement. Today we're going to learn about loops, and more specifically the for and the while loop. Now, the official Python documentation, as you can see here, simply calls them statements, but if you want to be more precise, you can see them as control flow statements, meaning that they allow you to control the flow of your programs. Okay, so since we are covering them in one lesson, what is actually the major difference between the for and the while loop? So a for loop, which is specified over here, allows you to iterate over the elements of a sequence. And we already learned about sequences in Python, which can be lists, dictionaries, tuples, sets, strings. So strings are sequences of characters and more. So this can be seen, the for loop can be seen as a definite iteration because we know in advance the number of iterations it's going to go for. Now, on the other hand, the while loop executes an instruction for as long as a certain condition is met or is true. Once the condition we specified at the beginning of the while loop stops being true, the while loop terminates. In this case, we can see a while loop as an indefinite iteration because we don't exactly know in advance the number of iterations it's going to go for. Okay, now all this theory might have gotten you a bit confused, so let's be specific and learn about these loops through an example. So what we'll actually do is define a list and then iterate through the elements of the list using both the while loop and the for loop, which are, like I said, control flow statements. So I'm going to move to a Python interpreter shell over here, and I would suggest you do the same if you want to follow along. So let's start by defining our list. So I'll say my list equals capital I am learning Python for cybersecurity. Okay, so this list is actually a sequence of strings. Now, if we want to iterate through it using the for loop, we'll just say for element in my list, simply say print element. And it's as simple as that. So see why Python is such a good language to start with when you're learning programming. It's actually so very explicit, clean, and straightforward. Here I'm simply saying that for each element in my list, and this element word could be whatever word you want. I could call it item, word, or whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter, as long as you don't use one of the reserved words in Python, like dict, class, def, and so on and so forth. Okay, so let's run this, and this will actually print all these elements, one per line. So I am learning Python for cybersecurity, and as I said, we can replace element with whatever word or character we want. I could simply say for I in my list, print I, and it's gonna do exactly the same thing. Now, you can make them more complex. So this is a very simple for loop. One example of a more complex loop would be using ranges. So let's say for I in range, not range, but range 10, let's say print I. So range is also a built-in Python method, and here we provided one single argument, which is the number 10. Number 10 represents where we want to stop with the loop. So range 10 simply means 10 numbers starting from 0, and that's 0 to 9. So for every element in this range, 0 to 9, which this range is composed of 10 elements, print that element to the screen. And if I hit enter, we can see all the numbers from 0 to 9. Okay, now with the range, we can be even more precise by specifying the starting point, the stop point, and we can also specify the step. So if I say for I in range 3, 10, print I, this will print starting from 3 all the way up to 9. So 9 is going to be our stop point. So 10 minus 1 actually. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And like I said, we can also specify the step. So I could say for I in range, let's say 1, 20, and 2. So starting from 1, stopping 20 minus 1, which is 90, and going from every second element, this will print, if I say print I, this will print 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, all the way up to 19. So as you can see, we can use the range with one single argument, which specifies the stop point, and it starts at 0. We can specify it with two arguments, which is the starting point and the stop point, and we can specify the range with three arguments: the starting point, the stop point, and also the steps. Okay, now please make sure to check the mandatory readings for more details on for loops. Now going back to our list here, so my list, let's see how we can iterate through it using a while loop. So as I said, let's look one more time at our list. So I said a while loop executes until a condition is true. Now we have our list. What condition would we need to specify to have the same output as the for loop? Okay, so it might be a bit tricky here if you're new to this, but please pay close attention. So we build the loop using the while word. So we say while, then we need to specify the condition and then the instruction to be executed as long as the condition is met. In this case, we'll say while I is smaller than the length of my list, and then we'll specify the condition over here. This is going to be where the condition is. But let me just remind you that length, my list, is going to specify the length of the list, which is 6 elements. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so again, while I is smaller than the length of my list, which simply means while I is smaller than 6, please execute the following condition. So we don't know what I is because we have never instantiated it. So what we need to do first is to specify that I equals to 0. So now we can do the loop while I is smaller than the length of my list, which simply means while 0 is smaller than 6, please execute the following condition. And we want to print the element of the list. So we'll say print my list, square brackets, I. So square brackets, I, which is simply the element in the list and at index I. Okay, once we have printed it, we need to update I, because otherwise we'll end up in an infinite loop. So we'll just say I equals I plus 1, which simply means add 1 to I. Okay, so let's actually run this. And as you can see, I am learning Python for cybersecurity. It's the same thing that we had with the for loop over here, but let's try and explain it or understand it in better detail. So how would this go? So we have I equal to 0. We enter the loop. We print my list of 0, and then we update I to be equal to 1. We then go back at the beginning of the loop and we check if I is smaller than 6. So 1 is smaller than 6. Then we go ahead and print my list of 1, which is M. Okay. Then we update I to 2. Then we go back and check if 2 is smaller than 1. Alright, and so on and so forth until the condition here is no longer true. Now, I know in this case it would simply be much easier to use a for loop. However, there are many situations when while loops are really useful, and there's more to for and while loops. We have the break, we have the pass, and we also have the continue statements, which allow us to further refine the control flow of the program, which is why I once again ask you to check the mandatory readings in the accompanying document for further individual study of these loops and statements. Reading them is necessary for your successful completion of the course. Now, with that said, I will be seeing you in the next lesson.